In this video, let's try to learn about standardizing API results. In the previous video, we have already learned about the problem details, but this is actually not enough. Even with the code that changed to like this, as what I've showed you in the previous video, we are going to still run into scenarios where the API returns different results, different type of results. Of course, when you have everything okay, you would expect the valid JSON that represents the object that you expect, right? For example, in this case, you expect a employees array here as a valid JSON object. And here you would have a valid JSON that represents the employee itself, right? And there are errors. We have the problem details, the validation problems, so results.validation problem or results.problem. So these helper functions can also help us to produce consistent JSON. However, even with these, it's not enough. I'm going to demo that to you. So if we run this, and then we're trying to, let's say we're trying to go to employees 111, and then you click on send. So what do you get? You get this 404 not found, but look at the body. The body has nothing in it. So this is inconsistent. If your client application is looking to parse that JSON in the body, now you don't have the body. So this is wrong, right? And for example, if I just remove this whole thing and provide null, and then I'm going to send it to the correct location here and click on send button. Now we have this exception. So this is also not the same format of JSON. We are looking for the JSON format that follows the RFC 7807 standard. So how do we cover every situation so that the API that we create is always returning consistent JSON results when there are errors? Well, first of all, we need to handle the problem with throwing exceptions in our application. For example, in this case that we just demoed here. So we need to be able to spit out the correct JSON that follows the standard when there's exception. So we know that inside the pipeline, there is a exception handler middleware that we can use. So we can add that middleware to our pipeline here. And we need to do that in a specific manner, right? We can't do that in a normal way. So let's come to line 7 here. And then we can say that if app.environment is not development, right? If it's not development, then this is the place where we need to spit out the correct JSON that follows the standard. So app.use exception handler here. All right, so let me finish the previous sentence. So we need to test whether this is development or not, because if it's development, then it's not a problem seeing this error message, right? It actually helps the developers to debug. But when it's production, right, when it's QA, we expect the result to be consistent. That's why we use the exception handler here. But then when we use the exception handler, usually we would provide the error page, the error handling path here. And in order to produce consistent result that follows the standard, we just leave it as this. Okay, we'll leave it as this. But what we need to do is, once we have the builder, we need to configure the services. What we need to do is we need to add the problem details service into the service collection here. Now, when this is provided here, or maybe we should say configured here, then when the exception handler captures an exception, then it's going to actually use the problem details. Right? It's going to spit out JSON with problem details by following the problem details standard. And remember, you have to place this exception handler as the first middleware in the middleware pipeline. Okay, so now let's give it a try and see whether this helps us to solve that particular problem where exception is thrown. All right, application is running. Let's come back over here and try to just click on the send button once more. All right, now we see type, title, status details, and then we have this exception here, which actually follows the standard. Okay. And now let's try to do the other test. Let's change this to 111, 222, whatever. Just make sure the path doesn't, then click on send button. Well, we still have this 404 not found. So this is the second case we need to cover. We need to cover the status code that is returned from the system. And for that purpose, we will need to add the status code middleware. Let's go to our page here, and then underneath this exception handling middleware here, we can say am.use status code pages middleware. And this by default should also spit out the errors by following the standard. And let's give it a try. All right, so here we make sure that we enter a path that doesn't exist. Now click on send button. Now you can see that we received a JSON that follows the standard. Type, title, status, everything is correct. All right, so those are the two things you need to do to cover those two scenarios. And those are the only two scenarios you need to worry about. So now with this change, your application as a web API application is always going to give you consistent results when there are errors. Just need to make sure that as a developer, when you do specific validations inside your endpoint handler, you need to use results.validation problems or results.problem helpers. Okay, that's everything I want to cover in this video. If any questions, please let me know. If not, I will see you in the next one.